Welcome to We Get Real AF, everyone. I'm Vanessa Alava.
And I'm Sue Robinson. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to our awesome podcast.
Here at We Get Real AF, we love featuring tech design specifically by women for women. So it's a pleasure to introduce today's guest, Ursula Mead, founder and CEO of company ratings platform In Her Sight. In Her Sight is an online professional development resource which enables women to thrive and make better informed decisions about their careers while searching for jobs with potential employers. In kind, the site helps hiring organizations become leaders in hiring and supporting a more inclusive workforce. Ursula is a tremendous advocate for gender diversity and is driven to create better workplaces for women across industries. Amen, Ursula. Thank you so much for what you're doing, and thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Vanessa and Sue. I'm very thrilled to be speaking with you today and sharing more about the work that we're doing at In Her Sight.
Love it. Real quick, where can our listeners find you online?
At inhersight.com. That is our website. You can see data for hundreds of thousands of companies there. You can read lots of great content. Of course, we have social media across all the different channels, and you can get great resources on places like LinkedIn or Twitter, but our homepage is a great starting point. And if you feel like venturing beyond, we also have a mobile app.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. Let's start at the top, explain what is In Her Sight.
Sure. So you gave a really great overview, and I was taking notes of some of the ways you described us because it was such a good description. But at its core, In Her Sight is a platform with the mission to improve the workplace for women by measuring it. And the way that we do that is we have women share their insight into what it's like to work at companies across all of the aspects of work that are most important to women. A lot of people will think of this as like a glass door for women, and I think that's a really interesting comparison. There's certainly a lot in common with like a Yelp or a TripAdvisor or a Glassdoor, but what makes our platform different and more relevant is looking at companies through that particular lens of women and what women's priorities are at different stages of their lives and careers. And when we do that, when we look at companies and evaluate them that way, it turns out we measure a lot of things that hadn't been measured before, whether it's things like a sense of belonging or feeling like you have representation in leadership and access to equal opportunities, things that we know can be hard for women to find, but are really important to their happiness. So we are a platform that collects this really relevant information from women about what it's like to work at a company. And then we use that data to help women find companies where they can thrive and succeed. And we also use it to help companies do a better job of supporting women that they're already employing or that they're trying to attract.
I love this because, to your point, women value some things similarly to men in a job, in a profession, in a workplace, but some things are very different. And I'm curious to know, what was the impetus for you starting In Her Sight?
That's a great question. I think a lot of people who start companies, they'll often talk about a one aha moment that they had, and they had this moment, this realization that they needed to do something. Mine was a very long aha moment. It was years of small ahas where I was thinking about different concepts, studying information, but most importantly, I was at a stage in my life where I had switched on to the idea that workplaces weren't created equal and that there was work that needed to be done to advance gender equality. And for me, the switching on moment was becoming a working mom. And I think the switching on moment for a lot of women is when they enter that stage of their lives, but it can happen at all different times. It could happen early in your career if you're feeling passed over for a promotion, or it can happen if you are really experiencing a safety concern and you're not happy with the resolution. There are a lot of different things that could make you think, gosh, I wonder if we have enough support here, and really start to care about it. But for me, I happen to be a new working mom, And I was listening to the stories that were starting to come out about what women were facing at work. This was around the 2013 timeframe. So this was the beginning of this latest wave of awareness around gender issues. And I was listening to sort of voices, like the important voices of women like Anne Marie Slaughter, who were publishing great content and data around the topic of support or lack of support for women at work. And I was also listening to a lot of personal anecdotes from women in my own life, whether they were friends or family. And I was just struck by how different all of our experiences were, in particular around motherhood and being a working mom. And that made me really interested in understanding, well, what is the support like for working moms? And that just extended more broadly to different areas. What's it like for women who are looking to climb the corporate ladder? And what's it like for women who are looking for safe work environments? And I just began to immerse myself in the topic of gender equality at work. And I also started to look at what work was being done to improve some of what I was seeing. For example, at the time, just 4% of Fortune 500 CEOs were women. I'm excited to report that at the end of 2020, we had our record high of women leaders in the Fortune 500. It's doubled, it's at 8%. So still a long way to go, but that's improvement. But I was looking at stats like that, like 4% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women, or at the time, just 12% of private sector employers offered fully paid maternity leave. And I was starting to try to figure out, well, what's being done to address this and why isn't it working? Because if women are 50% of the workforce and talent pool, if we improve business performance and outcomes, why is support so lagging from companies that we know are working really hard to compete for talent? And this was just a problem area that started to fascinate me. And in that process, I started to think about why I felt the solutions that were being put forth weren't working and how we could do it better and differently.
Wow. Yeah. And I think that most of us that are listening to this, right, can relate to that. We can relate to all of those things. If you would, you started with all of the things that you have been hearing firsthand. Since you've been in existence, you shared some of the findings, but can you get into some of the nitty gritty findings? Like, what are women looking for in the workplace? What do employers need to be doing for women to feel supported? Some of those high level stats, or even getting into some of the nitty grittier things that you're able to share with us. We'd love to hear some of those.
Sure, yeah. So I mentioned that we measure companies across the areas that are specifically important to women. And some of those factors or categories that we measure really are focused on things that you would consider specific to the women's experience. And some of the things that we measure are more broadly applicable to the employee experience, but they can be felt, interpreted, experienced differently by women. And so it's important for us to look at them from the lens specifically of how women are experiencing them. So I'll give you an example of that. Would be something like flexible work hours. We know that flexibility is universally important to employees. It's something that is considered and valued regardless of your gender identity. However, it can be experienced very differently within a culture. And in many cases, when women think about flexibility and feeling like they can make use of flexible policies, their experiences differ. And so that's an example of a factor that we measured. We want to look at it through the women's lens because of the difference of those experiences. But broadly speaking, we measure several different categories. We measure opportunity. So we look at things like, do women feel like they have access to equal opportunities? Are they satisfied with their chances of becoming a manager and their management opportunities? And how satisfied are they with the representation of women in leadership? Those are sort of our opportunity metrics, and those have been with us all along. They have been with us from day one. We knew from our research, and we knew from our year in beta testing with large groups of thousands of women that these were factors that were really important to them. But others have evolved. We have a group that is schedule and flexibility, where we measure things like paid time off and your comfort and satisfaction being able to use that paid time off, the ability to telecommute with a new lens, of course, on COVID-19 and how satisfied you are, since many companies went remote or are now making very important decisions about whether to stay remote. And I mentioned flexibility. We also measure flexible work hours. We have an enrichment category that looks at things like wellness initiatives and salary satisfaction and mentorship and learning. A family category that looks at maternity and adoptive leave and general family growth support. And then our last overarching set of metrics is around culture. And there we have things like sense of belonging, support for diversity, focusing on the programs that prioritize DEI, social activities, the people you work with, how respectful, professional, and unbiased they are, and also employer responsiveness, which is a really important metric that we developed coming out of the Me Too movement, where we measure how satisfied women are with their channels for elevating issues and concerns like safety and harassment, and with the outcomes of escalating those issues. So these are and we have an overall satisfaction. So we have 18 now different categories that we measure, some of which have increased in importance recently, and some of which have been added coming out of things like the pandemic, and also out of Black Lives Matter last summer, when we really took a hard look at our product and looked for ways to make sure that we were collecting the most relevant information for all of the women in our network, and that we were using it to its greatest ability toward intersectional needs, which we are happy to dig in on. But those are the categories we mentioned that we measure. And as I mentioned, we have data across those categories for coming close to 200,000 companies, primarily in the US. That's where we're focused. And we have tens of millions of data points about women's experiences at work. And we get to see really interesting insights from this. And we use them in our content. We use them to sort of shed light on what's happening in different industries. Very high level, broad strokes, people often say, well, what do women care about? And what are the things that they want? And it's interesting for us because while things do tend to shuffle around in the rankings, the bread and butter benefits remain really the most highly sought after benefits from women. And when we talk about bread and butter benefits, we talk about things like good paid time off. We talk about things like the other ones are salary satisfaction. Paid time off and salary satisfaction are, of course, big leaders in what women tell us are must-haves from their next work environments. And we also see things creep up in importance and make the top 5, like flexibility and the people you work with. And what's interesting is that those are really important. We know that women want to have support in the areas where they get to determine what they're going to do with their lives, where they have the means and the resources to, take the vacations, spend time the way they want to spend their time, have the financial support and strength they need to be able to afford the things that they want in life. But when we look at the things that correlate with women's happiness at work, we start to see some other metrics creep up. And this for us has always been an opportunity for us to help teach women about the things that they may not be looking for in a workplace, but that are really very important. And sometimes it may be that you just don't realize you're not going to get these things in a workplace. And
Absolutely.
so you don't know. You think, I know I need these things. These are my table stakes. I need time off. I need good pay. But some of the things that drive your happiness or your unhappiness at work are things like the perception of equal opportunities. Do I feel like I have the same opportunities as my male counterparts? That's one that is more important to women's happiness than women often realize when using our platform. Another one that is incredibly important that is not often identified as a must-have is employer responsiveness. And that is, again, that feeling like if you talk to your employer about something that needs attention, are you satisfied with how they respond? And you may be thinking going into a company that you don't even realize you need channels for escalating issues or concerns. But once you've realized that, and once you've used it, if you're satisfied with it, you tend to be very happy at the company. And if you're dissatisfied, you tend to be unhappy at the company. And then a third one that I'll note, which is interesting to watch because this is one of our newer metrics, is sense of belonging. And that one is increasingly showing up as a driver of women's overall satisfaction, which is if you feel comfortable bringing your whole self to work, if you feel included and you feel welcome, that is a factor that we started measuring about a year ago. And that one is increasingly showing up as very important to your overall happiness in a workplace.
It's interesting to me because the accessibility and availability of so much data enabled by modern technology seems to be creating a bigger onus on companies to have to fire on all the cylinders that you just described, Ursula. It used to be if you had a 9 to 5 and you had a decent paycheck and decent benefits, meaning health insurance and things like that, that's what the company considered to be a service to its employees and what it owed to employees, right? But now that we can measure things like a sense of belonging or all these other data points that you've described, that's a much heavier lift for companies to try to accommodate. And so I'm wondering how companies are receiving the data that you make available to them, because I know you have resources available to companies and employers as well. How receptive are they? And just describe a bit about the resources you do provide to employers who want to create a welcoming workplace and an attractive, really talented, diverse workforce.
Sure. Yeah. The bar is really high with understanding and supporting your employees. And we talked about just how much data we have about companies and about those ratings. But at the same time that we are capturing this ongoing data about companies, we at In Her Sight spend much of our time trying to capture the today sentiment of what's important to women, where we make sure that in parallel with this effort of how are these critical areas progressing over time, we're asking, what do you really need right now? And wanting to make sure that we get that information back to companies as well. And what I'll say is that I think the companies, we have actually thousands of engaged employers, companies that have reached out, claimed their page, that want to engage with our network or our data in some way. We have hundreds of hiring companies that are specifically using us to improve their reach with female candidates. But the thing that is starting to emerge, some of the data is showing that the companies that are really successful at firing on all cylinders, as you said, Sue, the companies that are successful at supporting talent from underrepresented backgrounds, they have comprehensive listening strategies in place where they are both internally and externally finding insights about what that talent is experiencing and trying to incorporate that into their decision making. And sometimes that's in the form of surveys and questions and answers and voices. And sometimes it's also through data and benchmarking. And so we provide a little bit of both. So while we might provide benchmarking data for them to see, how is our satisfaction with access to equal opportunities uh, compared to our peers, compared to other companies of the same size or in the same industry. We'll also be sharing insights like how many women right now feel like they're heard by their employees at all, because that's an example of a survey that we recently ran. Or we might give them benchmarking data that tells them how satisfied in general women are with their wellness initiatives versus other companies. And at the same time, we'll enhance that insight by saying, do you know the most important well-being benefit for women right now? Because we do, we asked, we know these things are changing all the time, and provide them with that insight too. And I'll share because I think it's fascinating that right now, the number one most valued wellness benefit from employers by women is mental health support, which after the year that we've had, it's not that surprising. They're looking for things like meditation apps and coverage of therapy stipends and things that can help them with deal with the stress and the burnout that has happened for so many women during the pandemic and everything that they've been trying to juggle. Whereas if we look at the responses from men through our research, they still want things like fitness classes and nutrition and healthy snacks and things like that. So it's really important that that employers have these extra insights, and they can and should ask a lot of these questions internally, and a lot of them do. But we also see that women and talent from underrepresented backgrounds in general often don't feel enough safety sharing their experiences through some of those internal surveys. So getting this supplemental insight can be really beneficial.
You hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what I've been thinking, because you're all of the data you're collecting is so important. And I think the value there is because you've created a very safe haven, a community of people that are willing to share and be vulnerable. When organization of any size is trying to do that internally, they may not feel that, you know, safety, autonomy to really speak up and say what they're really feeling without retaliation, without it counting against them in some way, shape, or form within the organization. So that was actually going to be a question of mine, because I know that you offer the insights that have been collected through the community you've created. But if you offer specific resources to organizations where you come in as an outside party, as a third party, to offer those resources, to have those types of consultant sessions, and potentially do the collecting of the data for the company, so that way there's a layer of separation.
Yes, I think that layer of separation is unfortunately more important than a lot of companies realize. I think companies have been fabulous about adopting those internal surveys. And they've done it so much that sometimes people will talk about that internal survey fatigue. But sometimes that question is, are you really getting the authentic insight that you need? And also, do you really know what questions to be asking? And because we sort of sit between women and employers, we get to look at women's experiences a little bit more holistically and have a deeper, more personal conversation with them, where we can ask questions about feeling heard by employers. And we can, in that same survey, ask questions about feeling heard by their family and their friends. And we can have a conversation that gets more to, where are the issues? Women are more likely to open up about things that are challenges in their work-life balance and things like that, because we aren't their employer, and they don't have to worry about this information identifying them in some way, or being shared in a way that puts their identity at risk. And they don't have to worry about their employer knowing too much about them, or thinking, oh gosh, Jane has too much on her plate and she feels overwhelmed, like she's not ready for this next project. And I think that's unfortunately still a huge concern for women when they're giving their feedback internally.
How do you plan for different personality types with this? Because obviously you have the layer of like women, underrepresented voices, but then you have different personalities of people. and how they communicate, and some being more passive, some being more aggressive, a combination of the two, so when you're getting or receiving the data that you potentially, let's say you are that third party company that comes in and does that, how do you account for that?
So we don't actually go into companies, but we still stay an external third party where we sort of we talked a little bit about where the idea for the company came from. I didn't mention that we are at our core a tech and data team. So the platform was built by a group of technologists, really, product, UX, and engineers that think about this from both a data scalability perspective and also from a how do we productize this in a way that we can deliver insights and data and action plans in ways that don't necessarily require us to go and individually, which is another way of saying it was built by a bunch of introverts. You talk about personality types. So, what we do is we sort of look for a lot of different ways to present the data. And that's sort of how we think about building these different personalities or needs into the product itself, where we'll have the ability to look at our data in more depth, in particular in a quite substantive new retention focused product that we're in the process of releasing now. But at the same time, we'll have some of that same data presented in different ways. It might be presented in an article with experts talking about things that you can do. We're looking at ways of incorporating more multimedia for the different learning styles, so that we can make sure that we have something for the person who wants to immediately put the data to work, the person who wants to dig in more and just play around with the numbers and look at things by different departments or by different aspects of us demographically. And then we have other ways for people who just want to immerse themselves in the topic and learn more. And as an inclusive a platform that's focused on being inclusive, it's really important to us to have different things that you can do and different ways you can engage with what we're producing.
I was looking at your website and I thought it was very interesting that tech and finance industries topped your June list, 32% and 30% respectively, of best places to work for, the companies that fit into the best places to work for, since we're a technology podcast. I also thought that the statistic that there is 22% less turnover in companies that have a diverse workforce. I thought that was a really good insight, because again, I feel like, especially if you're a smaller organization, trying to juggle all of this data and what kinds of programs and policies and things can I put into place, that could be kind of challenging. So I think it's helpful to know that there's a payoff from that perspective. And I'm curious if there's a certain sweet spot for companies to utilize all this data and these services that you provide. Is there a certain size company that you find really can benefit the best from the kinds of data points that you guys are collecting for them?
Those are all great questions. And observations. You noted that there were a lot of tech and finance companies that were sort of rising to the top for our lists of companies with great scores. Our lists are dynamic, so they change each month, so that we can make sure that you're getting the most up-to-date insight into which companies are doing well, especially as things change so much right now. We haven't even talked about, all of the turmoil that women are going through with the transition for some companies back to work, and trying to figure out, coming out of the pandemic, how things are going to shake out. But it's funny, for a very long time, for many years, I'd say that we have had a lot of attention on both of those industries, on tech and finance, because there are a lot of companies that we love to talk about, whether they're the big tech companies or the big banks, and they get a lot of the spotlight around these issues. And there are a lot of very clearly established challenges, different ones, but established challenges in those industries. At the same time, our data has always shown that because those industries have been competing for talent more aggressively and for a longer time, in particular for women talent, for tech talent. They're sort of they're starting at a better place when it comes to things like all of these perks and all of the different ways that you can support your employees. And when we look at tech overall, I think we wrote an article for TechCrunch many years ago that said that tech was the overall top rated industry by women. Now, it has some metrics and some factors where they're the lowest rated, but on balance, it has a lot of things going for it in terms of again, things like salary and compensation being extremely good in that industry. Parental leave has always been something that tech companies have been leaders around in providing that. A lot of the flexibility, these things have been, sort of part of the tech story for a long time. And as a result, while there have been areas that need work, they have a lot of areas that they've already worked on and areas that they're getting right, which as innovators, we hope that they are doing that first. But it's actually the industries that we don't talk about that concern me the most, that I'm always the most fascinated by, whether it's manufacturing or construction, these old male-dominated industries that are far behind across all of our metrics, that they're never really in the spotlight. They don't get a ton of press and attention, but they are really important to the employment of millions of women. And there's a lot of work that really needs to be done by those industries. And finance too is actually an interesting one, because that's one of those industries where we've seen a lot of gains there, in particular in the opportunity realm, with women getting access to a lot of the top management positions in financial institutions. And we've seen a lot of gains there. And at the same time, in parallel, we have seen rising satisfaction in that industry, which has been great to watch. But yeah, so that was a good note to see that in our data just by scanning the list. And then you also mentioned sort of the benefits to companies if they do get this right, and if they are able to create happy gender diverse workforces. There's been this long established and growing business case for why companies should prioritize this. And we have collected a lot of that information. We share it back with our employer partners. One thing that I think is interesting in the last year is that one of the stronger focuses has been on the moral imperative to do it. Not just specifically to focus on women, but to focus on equity in general. And again, this has been a product of a lot of the racial equality conversations coming out of last summer and Black Lives Matter. But I think that it's introduced a really important imperative for companies, which is the moral imperative to focus on this because it's the right thing to do, instead of just focusing on the potential business benefits it can provide. Because while that can be a really great way to get adoption from leadership, if a financial return is what they're after, and it doesn't appear as quickly or as apparently as they hope, it can often lead to a quicker abandonment of those efforts. And studies show that if your justification for some of these DEI initiatives is primarily around the financial benefits, for example, that those companies are more likely to sort of change those priorities and reallocate that effort if they don't get that payoff quick enough. And that hasn't been a successful approach for a lot of companies. So while the business benefits are there, it's nice to also see that the moral imperative is resonating with more and more companies, because this isn't just a, flip the light switch on and everything is you'll put these programs in place and you hire a few more people, and then you turn around and you see this particular return. It's really a long investment.
It's
Well,
a
let me tell
paradigm shift. Yeah.
I was just going to say, as more and more companies are trying to appear and show that they're more human centric, what's more human centric than investing in your workforce and showing and literally putting your money where your mouth is, saying, hey, we're doing all these things. We're doing these things because it's the right thing to do. It's the humane thing to do. And, out with the old, in with the new and progressive way of thinking. And if you do that now, to your point, with the tech companies that have been doing that for a very long time and have gotten it right, now they just need to employ more women, right? But if you set the tone down the line, it's only going to work to your favor, and your product is going to be better for it. Therefore, then you will make more money. It's like, it's this domino effect that once you put the dominoes in a row, and then once you tip it forward, eventually it's going to tip the next one and the next one and the next one. So it's just reframing your mindset.
Yeah, and I was going to just say, one of the hurdles that we try to encourage companies to get past is, I think sometimes companies that are just starting out on this journey and they're just starting to look at this and prioritize this and figure this out, sometimes they're concerned or sensitive to the fact that it's the beginning of their journey. But on the other hand, we're always telling them that transparency around this being a new priority is one of their most powerful assets, both internally and externally, because the more that they can own, this is where we are today, but this is where we want to be, the more they're going to gain the trust that they want from the women that are in that circle, and the more they're going to make them allies on that journey and say, all right, I want to become a part of this change. And the more that talent coming in is going to say, this is a really honest place. And this is a place that is starting to focus on this. So there's a lot of upward momentum that can happen here. There's a lot of potential. And we try to get them to reframe the idea that they're just starting into a positive. Because a lot of them will say, oh, we don't have a lot of women in leadership yet. And I say, that's okay. The most important thing is to be open about what you have today and where you want to be tomorrow.
I think that's a really important point that you make, Ursula, because more than 50% of employees in this country are employed by small businesses, right? And small businesses maybe don't have all the resources to do all the things all at once that a larger organization could do. And so I think it's super important for whatever organization size and type and industry you're in to show that you are on the path, that you're listening to your employees, and that you want what's best for everybody in the realm of what is feasible for you at that moment in time. So I think that was a great insight that you shared there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And actually, Sue, it's funny you mentioned that, because you had asked, is there a sweet spot in terms of company size and engaging with the platform like this? And I think we serve a lot of different companies of all different sizes and all different industries, and really with all different needs. Some is around, getting the message out that they exist, or, starting this journey and trying to understand what's important. And others, it's specifically around recruiting. But there are a lot of different needs that we serve. But some of my favorite companies to work with are the really early stage companies. This has been a group that we didn't really expect to sort of be able to prioritize this from a time and financial perspective. But the early stage companies that are growing and they see what has happened to the other companies that have come before them, and they want to do things differently, they have been really engaged partners of ours, both from a listening perspective, but also a learning perspective, where they say, like, here's what we're doing today. We are going to have more resources soon. What should we focus on next? So this is what we can provide right now. And we said, that's great. We'll help you find women who are looking for support in those areas, because there are certainly women who will say, I love it. I need these 3 things. This is a great place for me. But then when you're ready and you have the resources and capacity to increase the benefits and support, we can also say to them, here's another area for you to focus, and it's going to open up this many more women in this field who are saying like, I need a company that can provide this too. And so early stage partners are really fun to work with. They're just really on top of DEI, which we love.
Well, and I think that's where the greater change will come, right? Is if more and more small organizations feel empowered to start on this path and they gain momentum and they see other companies doing it and they see resources like you're providing that make it easier for them to do it. That's how I feel corporate culture changes, that kind of rises up from the bottom.
Absolutely. Well, and it's not just asking the question. You mentioned something key earlier, Ursula, and that was listening. They're listening, they're implementing, and they're doing. And that's what we want, obviously. And then another thing that we love to talk about is alignment. When everything is aligned, mind, body, spirit with your organization, with your staff, consumers will come. When they see things that are aligned, missions that are aligned with their values, it no longer becomes this. I think something that's used a lot right now is social responsibility. It's become that new buzzword, right? That buzz phrase like authenticity, right? Show and do versus saying, this is one of our social responsibility efforts or whatnot. Align yourself, do the things, and everything else will follow. So we love what you're doing. It's an awesome mission, and we're really, really, again, just thrilled to have had you on the show. Sue, before we get into our lightning round, I know that we want to learn more about Ursula's career in tech. We kind of heard about how In Her Sight was born, but do you have any other questions about In Her Sight?
No, I think it's time for the lightning round. We're coming up on our hour here, so we want to be respectful of Ursula's time. This has been great, though. So yeah. I'm ready for the lightning round if you are, Ursula.
So,
sure.
So Ursula, before we hop in there, maybe a couple of just sentences. Was tech always in your future as growing up in high school and college? Just to kind of walk us down your career a little bit.
Tech was actually a really fortunate surprise in my career. I actually started in publishing and was focused on sort of subscription businesses in the publishing field. And I started at what at the time was a financial publishing company called the Motley Fool that was transitioning into a financial tech company as the publishing industry was crashing, as we know, in 2008, and models around publishing were shifting dramatically. And as an always innovating company, they wanted to reorient around agile development. They wanted to create more online products, and they wanted to shift. And when I got to the company, I was joining as a publisher of financial newsletters, and I think it was within my first couple of weeks that I was sent to my first Agile development conference, where I was being taught all of the ways of Agile and Scrum and how to build products efficiently and effectively as we grew our technology team and as my role became that of a product manager. And I really could not have asked for a better introduction, because it turns out that product management is really my calling. Today, I'm the CEO of In Her Sight, but you really can't keep me out of the product development at all, because it's still where my passion lies. It's for anybody who is considering the tech field and they're not really sure where to begin, I'm always happy to tell them all about product management and why I think it's the best entry point into the field.
Awesome.
Very,
all
very
right.
Good. Let's get into it.
Let's do it. Ursula, lightning round is super fun, super easy. Just to get to know you on a more personal level, I will start us off. If you had not followed your tech career path, what profession would you have pursued?
So I'm, gosh, I assume you don't want the publishing alternative, since I was thrust
was that what you?
I'm going to go like far afield, where this isn't. I don't think I would have pursued this, but I always have loved being in and volunteering for libraries. So I might have had an alternate career path, working in library science or something like that.
Cool.
That's unique. We haven't heard that one before. All right, Ursula, how do you define success?
For me, I know when I'm successful when I'm feeling the happiest.
What are 3 pieces of advice you'd give your younger self?
I wish I could go back in time and tell earlier Ursula to invest more sooner. And I want any women listening to this podcast to do that too. To worry less and to compost more.
Love
I
it.
like that.
Very diverse and
Sustainability effort
Yes.
there. All right. What celebrity would you cast to play you in a movie?
So when I was a small girl, I was about the same age growing up as Winona Ryder. She's had a crazy career, but people used to say, "Oh, you look just like Winona Ryder." So I guess she would be the most appropriate person.
I love Winona Ryder,
Mhm.
especially in Stranger Things. That's one of my favorites.
Tell us something about you that people might be surprised to know.
Let's see. I can spend a 4-hour block on a Saturday just flipping crepes.
Flipping crepes, like
Oh.
pancake crepes.
Yes, yes,
Oh.
yes. Making very large
A girl
stacks
after my own heart. I love to eat. I am the
That sounds
foodie of the
good.
two of us. So you had me. You said crepe, and I'm like, huh? What?
I thought you said
and there-
crates at first. I was like, is that a type of CrossFit? And then I got the
Crepes.
crepes.
It was a crepe.
Oh yes, crepes, where I find that to be one of the best ways to relax is to just make, a huge batter of a huge bowl of crepe batter and just to stand there and make large stacks of crepes on the weekend.
Yeah.
You're speaking my love language. Okay, awesome. I'm going to Ursula's house. All right. What myth about women in STEM would you like to dispel?
I think it's time to break the myth that women don't know how to and don't negotiate.
All righty. Last one. Fill in the blank like a girl.
I'll follow that with negotiate like a girl.
I like it.
Perfect. Yes. Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you again. This has been so fantastic. Check out inhersight.com for amazing insights on companies you should be looking at, things that employers should be doing to diversify their workforce and to support women in across all industries.
Yes. Thank you, Ursula. This has been so great. Love what you're doing. Love the platform. Definitely check it out. So many great resources there for both employers and for people, in the workforce, women in the workforce. So thanks for your time.
Thank you both. It's been great.